Peak Performance Sustainable Strategies for Success. Join passionate automotive trainer and coach Andrew Uglow as he explores the concept of peak performance in automotive workshops, discussing the challenges of engaging technicians, building a supportive culture, and the unsustainable nature of constant demands. Discover insights on trust, management, and the balancing act required to bring out the best in your team. I'm your host, Anthony Perl, and this is the Frictionless Workshop podcast. Let's get cranking. Andrew, talking about this whole concept of achieving peak performance, I think there's a few things to unpack still there. It's the idea of whether peak performance is even really achievable. What is it? How achievable is that as a notion? But as we've talked about previously, it's that idea of how do you ramp something up to do that? And what do workshop owners need to do to get more out of engaging their techs and getting them to certain points where peak performance is something that is desirable for a small period of time to achieve something? And how do you even work out what that should be?
Yeah, that's a series of very pointed questions, isn't it? Let's start at the beginning. What is peak performance? Peak performance is a person working to the absolute limit, mentally, emotionally, physically, of what they're capable of, and for a period of time to produce an outcome. So it might be solve a problem. It might be to, there was an error at the front desk and this repair order got lost and the customer's coming in 30 minutes time and this is like a 3-hour job. Well, okay, we've just got to get it out. The customers, maybe they're coming from the country or something like that. The option of them leaving the car is not available. Well, now what do we do? Well, we need peak performance. We need something out of the hat, something arguably miraculous to be able to do the work in a period of time that's just not normally capable. So you might put multiple people on the job. There's a variety of different things of ways you would do that. But when we're talking about peak performance, we're talking about something abnormal. Like we're well beyond that, well beyond excellence. And so let me start by answering that question about how do you get it? By going backwards, because that's kind of how my brain works. Expecting it, demanding it, manipulating it is not the way you get it. That is unsustainable, and that will lead to good people leading your business at speed. That is a huge breach of trust. And I think that's ultimately one of the reasons why these senior technicians said, we don't do that, because we know what's going to happen when we do that. There was no trust between these people and their management, which I think is profoundly sad. You can facilitate it though. You can create an environment, you can create a culture where people are willing to give discretionary effort, because the whole point of discretionary effort is it's discretionary, right? And so when people are prepared to offer it because it's worth it to them, they get rewarded, they get recognized, they get something in return for going not just above excellence, but well beyond anything that would normally be expected of someone. When there's something in it for them, we talk about with them, what's in it for me? Or when there's something meaningful in it for the technician, then absolutely, that's part of the culture that you set up. That's part of the rules for the game that you play by. That's part of the values and the beliefs that you hold about your technicians, about your workshop, about your customers, about your team. Like there's a variety of different things that go to make that environment an environment that facilitates technicians wanting to do that. Because at the end of the day, when a tech wants to, and this gets back to what we were talking about, technician engagement, we want our techs to want to do the work that we need them to do, right? And so the question really needs to be, well, how do I create an environment that makes it easy for my techs to want to do more, to want to do the quality, to want to do the performance? And we talk about retention, we talk about all these sorts of things. But at the end of the day, there's got to be something in it for them. And I think looking at the challenge of technician engagement from a management perspective is a very different view from looking at it from a technician's perspective. And I think as management, we need to go back and look at, well, what actually is it that's in it for my technicians? Like step into their shoes, go to second position and view the world through their shoes and their world and go, well, what would make it worth it for my guys to want to do this? And perhaps even ask them. Sure, that will probably involve money, but I'll guarantee you that it's more than just that. I very confident that it's a whole lot more than just that. And so start to build that culture and that environment. Yeah, absolutely.
It's very similar, isn't it, to we talked before about the football analogy, but the great football coaches, again, in any code, are man managers, and they're working towards a specific goal. Yes, there are other people that might come on board and help offer training and other things to improve those things in the athletes, but mostly it's about man management and bringing out the best at the right time in a coordinated effort, and working out, as we said before, about when to peak, and also having that shared goal. So it's a lot about how you drive the team as much as just about, as you say, just about money. Money is important, but it's not the only driver.
Money is, I'm going to argue, a consequence of doing everything else well. Like if you look after your people, you lead your team well, if you do all those elements, you've got good processes, you've got a good environment, the people have got the resources they need to perform, they're recognized and rewarded for performing, you'll make money. You'll struggle not to make money. But if you just go after the money at the expense of everything else, well, that's a very short-term and unsustainable way to do things. And I want to, I just guess, throw this question out there about how much is enough? In the automotive world, we've got dozens and dozens of KPIs that we look for. We've got stacks of benchmarks. And so whatever number you're measuring, I want to ask the question about, well, how much is enough? Being that this whole concept of what these senior technicians were talking about when they said, well, if we show what we're capable of, it will never be enough. That'll become the norm. And if we were able to pull something out of their hat beyond that, well, that would become the norm. And so how much is enough? Because that's a vital question to be able to answer. And if your answer is it's never enough, you really need to go back and have a good hard think about how you're running the business, because that's unsustainable.
It's a really important question for businesses to be asking. And again, we go back to this whole idea of looking at things that are not just about numbers, looking at the human element and understanding how people are wired, and that you can't get the most out of people all the time. And it really is delving in and understanding what is it that they need in order to sometimes get them out of a rut that might have occurred, or to get them working up towards something where we know this thing is coming and it's going to hit us on this day. So we have to get ourselves prepared and ready for that. And then we have to also equally get prepared to work out what is the other side of that, because that's not sustainable to get someone up to a certain level and keep them there. As we talked about previously, with any athletes, the world record breakers are not breaking the record or equaling that record every day.
Right. It's a thing. And to your point about, I subscribe to the 5 Ps or the 6 Ps, depending upon whether you want to be polite or not. And the 5 Ps are proper preparation prevents poor performance. There's another P in there if you wish to. But sometimes stuff happens, right? Things are outside of our control. We scheduled our day and we get, 5 cars turn up on the back of tow trucks through just, I don't know, whatever reason it was. They all got struck by lightning. We don't know why. And we've got to look at them. We've got to get them out. We've got to serve the customer, because ultimately that's why customers come to us, because they need our technical skill and ability. And if we're not serving the customer, well, why are we there? Because it's not about the money. The money will come, but if you're not doing that, then, and so we've now got a situation where we might have, maybe we can deliver 100 hours of labor normally, and there's now 120, 130 hours booked in, depending upon whatever the size of your team is. And it's like, well, how are we going to get through all of this work? Well, we're going to need the people to go and pull their weight. That's the only way it's going to happen. And if you've got a culture that is a push culture, which is you push your people, yeah, that's not going to work. It's just not going to work. Whereas if you've got a culture that's a pull culture, where you encourage and facilitate and create the reward and recognition and those types of things, if you've led your people effectively and you're in a position because there is trust and rapport to go, hey, look, stuff's happened. Can you help us? And this is where the discretionary effort comes in. Yeah, I can help because I know it'll be worth it. I know that there'll be quid pro quo. I know that there'll be something in it for me at the end. I know that I'll be not expected to continue to perform at, 4 million% efficiency because it's not possible. There would be a ramp up and a ramp down. There would be, look, here, have some time in lieu. There would be, whatever other incentives or methods or rewards or whatever, like a million different ways you can do that. But there'd be something in it for them. And I just want to jump back quickly if that concept of something in it for them. You made a really interesting statement before about getting the most out of your people. I'm going to offer that's not how we manage people. I appreciate that's how people get managed, but that's not how we should be managing our people. That is an unsustainable way of managing people, getting the most out of them. What we should be doing is getting the best out of them. And it's only a small distinction. But when I get the best out of my people, that's because they're offering their best, not I'm demanding it.
The Frictionless Workshop podcast is brought to you by Solutions Culture. For details on how to get in touch with Andrew, consult the show notes below. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Now, back to the podcast. And the difference as well is its circumstance, because the best on any given day can be different to the next day because of things that are going on around people that may or may not be in their control.
Oh, for sure.
That there are lots of factors at play on any given day. So with all the best of intentions,
the best laid plans of mice and men often
absolutely
go awry.
I mean, there are things that can happen that just impact the ability of what people are capable of on any day. So their best today may be very different to their best tomorrow.
Because we all have days where we're better than others, don't we? We have good days, we have bad days. And so, back to that whole concept of peak performance. Well, what is my peak? What is my peak today?
Desire, isn't it? I mean, that's one of the keys here is that, how do you sum up for managers who are trying to get into the psyche of understanding their techs, their perspective on what it is to operate in this environment?
So Stephen Covey wrote a book called The Speed of Trust. And one of the things from his book that he states is that if you have trust, you really don't need rules and regulations and explicit, rigid boundaries for people, because there's trust there and people will do the right thing because they trust you, because there's this mutual trust between management and not management. He said that if you don't have trust, though, you can never have enough rules. You can never have enough regulations. You just can't manage and control this. And I think this is ultimately the underlying part of what we're talking about is the absence of trust. And if we jump back to what those senior techs said, why would I do this when I know they're just going to make this become the normal anyway and expect it of me? I've had that experience. It doesn't work. I don't trust these people. And so I'm not going to give them the opportunity to exploit me. From the manager's perspective, he's got a number to hit. I've got to hit whatever my number is. And so I use all of my methods, processes, skills. I do all my bookings. I do all the stuff that the industry says that I'm supposed to do in order to hit my number. And if I go above my number, I get paid even more. And so it's now no longer about the people. It's now no longer about anything other than the money, really.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, that cynical, and I call it cynical, nature of not wanting to be at that level, something that's embedded in us from youth. I know personally, I remember year 7 high school, beginning of that, with, gym class, you're going to do a lap around, I don't know, it was 3-4 kilometers, whatever it was, the block. And we were young and foolish, and we ran like the wind because, first of all, we didn't know how far it was because we'd not really been around it before, and we didn't understand the consequences. Well, of course, we all did great times, and nobody ever got close to beating that time ever again, because next time we knew how far it was, and we knew that they were only going to keep pumping us to do more, and none of us wanted to do it. So, but it is that idea that is taught from a very early age. I just wanted to wrap up this part of the discussion as well, because we talked before we started recording a little bit about both of us loving, 70s, 80s kind of music and things here. And I know you'd given me a little bit of a note beforehand. There's a song that you've got in mind that kind of has a line that maybe best sums up the discussion that we've been having about technicians and their perspective on things.
Yeah, it's Creedence Clearwater Revival. I'm a bit of a fan of their music. I was a little bit late to the party. More of an 80s, 90s music tragic than the 70s music tragic. But arguably one of the most well-known songs is Fortunate Son. And it really was an anti-war song. And there's a line in the song, he talks about, that some people are born with star-spangled eyes when they send you out to war. And this particular part specifically says, and when you ask them, how much should I give? The only answer is more and more and more. And then he goes into the chorus, it ain't me, I had a fortunate son. And so that question then, what are we asking of our people? If it's always more and more and more, like how much is enough? At what point do we hit burnout? What point do we do harm? What point is sufficient for bonuses, for shareholders, for all those sorts of things? And if the answer is more and more and more, well, help me understand how that's sustainable. Help me understand how that serves anything other than making it about the money.
Thank you for listening to the Frictionless Workshop podcast. For details on how to get Andrew working with you and your technicians, take a look at the show notes. There's also a link to some special content you can access. I'm Anthony Perl, reminding you to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.